Chen wiped gunpowder residue from her fingers as another group of weekend warriors finished their session at the Fort Carson shooting range, their laughter echoing across the Colorado plains. At 29, she'd spent the last 3 years maintaining weapons for people who couldn't hit the broad side of a barn, while her own rifle gathered dust in her apartment closet. The irony burned deeper than the mountain sun. She probably understood ballistics and marksmanship better than half the instructors teaching civilian classes downtown. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's phone vibrated against the metal workbench where she'd been cleaning M4 rifles for the 3rd time that week. She glanced at the screen and felt her heart skip. The email subject line read, Colorado State Shooting Academy, Application Status Update. For 8 years in the Army, Sarah had been the soldier everyone wanted on their team, but no one wanted to acknowledge. Her marksmanship scores had consistently ranked in the top 5% of her unit, but somehow the recognition always went to her male counterparts. When she'd suggested modifications to improve weapon accuracy during desert deployments, her ideas were dismissed as overthinking. When those same modifications were later implemented successfully, the credit went to someone else. Now, 3 years after her honorable discharge, Sarah worked as a civilian contractor maintaining weapons at Fort Carson. It was steady work that paid the bills, but every day felt like watching other people live the life she'd earned the right to pursue. Competitive shooting had always been her secret dream, the chance to prove that precision, discipline, and natural talent mattered more than politics or prejudice. The Colorado State Shooting Academy had caught her attention through a targeted Facebook ad for military veterans. Their promise of advanced marksmanship training for competitive shooting sports seemed almost too good to be true. The academy boasted state-of-the-art facilities, championship-level instruction, and connections to professional shooting circuits that could launch careers. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the email. Congratulations, Sarah. Your application has been approved for our Elite Marksmanship Certification Program. Classes begin Monday, September 12th. Veteran tuition assistance available for qualified applicants. Sarah read the message 4 times before the words sank in. After years of dreaming, saving every spare dollar, and practicing in secret at remote mountain ranges, she finally had her shot. The acceptance felt surreal, like discovering you'd won a contest you'd forgotten entering. She'd found the academy through careful research, drawn by their reputation for producing championship-level shooters. Located in a converted warehouse complex 20 miles south of Colorado Springs, the facility wasn't fancy, but it held all the necessary certifications from the National Rifle Association and the International Shooting Sport Federation. Their alumni competed in Olympic trials, professional circuits, and military special operations units. Sarah's excitement was tempered by familiar caution. Military life had taught her not to celebrate too early. Disappointment hurt less when you kept expectations realistic. But this felt different somehow. This felt like destiny finally aligning with her preparation. That weekend, Sarah drove out to scout the academy's location. The converted warehouse sat on 50 acres of prairie, surrounded by rolling hills and distant mountain peaks. Multiple outdoor ranges stretched across the property, with targets positioned at distances from 25 to 1,000 meters. She counted at least 6 different shooting disciplines being practiced: precision rifle, practical shooting, clay sports, and what appeared to be military-style tactical courses. Sarah parked outside the chain-link fence and watched students practice on the 300-meter range. Their techniques varied wildly. Some showed promise, others looked like they'd learned everything from action movies. She found herself mentally coaching their positions, noting breathing patterns and trigger control that needed correction. "You thinking about joining our little circus?" Sarah turned to find a man in his late 40s approaching from the main building. He wore digital camouflage pants and a black polo shirt with the Academy logo. His build suggested someone who'd spent considerable time in weight rooms, and his buzz-cut gray hair screamed military background. Tattoos covered his forearms, Marine Corps symbols mixed with shooting sport emblems. "Just looking around," Sarah replied carefully, studying me. Man's demeanor. The man extended a calloused hand. "Marcus Patterson. Most folks call me Bull. I'm the head instructor here at Colorado State." His grip was firm, designed to test strength rather than offer welcome. Sarah shook his hand, maintaining eye contact. "Sarah Chen. I start classes Monday." Bull's expression shifted slightly, becoming more appraising. His eyes took in her slight build, Asian features, and civilian clothes with obvious calculation. "Chen. You're the Army vet from Fort Carson, right? The one with the maintenance background?" "That's correct." Bull nodded slowly, but Sarah caught something dismissive in his expression. A flicker of skepticism that disappeared almost immediately. "Well, Chen, hope you're ready for the real deal. Competitive shooting isn't like punching holes in paper during annual qualifications. Takes natural talent, mental toughness, and physical strength that not everyone possesses." As Sarah drove home, Bull's words echoed in her mind. She'd heard that tone before, the subtle suggestion that her background somehow disqualified, rather than prepared her for serious competition. It was the same dismissive attitude she'd encountered throughout her military career whenever she'd outperformed expectations or questioned established methods. But Sarah had learned long ago to let performance speak louder than prejudice. She'd faced down insurgents in Afghanistan, maintained weapons in 120-degree heat, and earned expert marksmanship badges that most soldiers never achieved. Bull Patterson had no idea what he was dealing with. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. Sarah had spent the weekend cleaning her personal rifle, reviewing ballistics tables, and practicing dry-fire exercises in her apartment. She'd also researched Bull Patterson online, discovering a decorated Marine sniper background and 15 years of competitive shooting instruction. The man had credentials, but Sarah had learned that impressive resumes didn't always translate to fair treatment or quality instruction. Monday arrived with typical Colorado sunshine and crisp mountain air. Sarah packed her gear bag with military precision, shooting mat, spotting scope, range bag, eye and ear protection, and her personal rifle, a custom-built precision instrument she'd assembled over 2 years of careful modifications. Every component had been selected for maximum accuracy and reliability. The drive to the academy gave Sarah time to prepare mentally for whatever challenges awaited. She'd survived military discrimination, hostile work environments, and supervisors who tried to break her spirit. Bull Patterson might think he was dealing with just another female veteran trying to prove herself, but Sarah Chen had been proving herself her entire adult life. As she pulled into the academy parking lot, Sarah noticed the other students arriving. Most drove expensive trucks and SUVs, their gear bags bearing premium brand names that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. She recognized the type immediately: recreational shooters with more money than skill, treating competitive marksmanship like an expensive hobby rather than a serious discipline. Sarah gathered her gear and walked toward the main building, her boots crunching on gravel. Through the windows, she could see Bull Patterson preparing for the morning briefing, his expression already showing the disdain she detected during their first meeting. Today would be interesting. Sarah had no illusions about facing an uphill battle, but she'd been fighting uphill her entire career. The difference now was that she had the skills, experience, and determination to win a war that Bull Patterson didn't even realize he'd started. As Sarah pushed through the academy's front door, she carried with her 8 years of military precision, 3 years of suppressed ambition, and a lifetime of proving that excellence recognized no gender, ethnicity, or economic background. Patterson was about to learn that underestimating Sarah Chen was the first mistake in what would become a very expensive education. Sarah arrived at Colorado State Shooting Academy 45 minutes early on Monday morning, carrying a notebook from the dollar store and wearing her cleanest tactical pants. The converted warehouse smelled like gun oil and concrete dust familiar, scents that should have made her feel at home. But the tension in the air suggested this wouldn't be a welcoming environment. The other students filtered in gradually, and Sarah counted 14 others in her elite certification class. Most were men in their 20s and 30s who looked like they'd stepped out of an outdoor gear catalog. Their equipment was expensive custom rifle cases, premium optics, and shooting gear that cost more than Sarah's car payment. She recognized the type immediately: recreational shooters with deep pockets treating competitive marksmanship like an expensive country club hobby. Tommy Kowalski stood out among them, a 26-year-old whose father owned a chain of sporting goods stores across Colorado. His rifle case alone probably cost $5,000, and he wore it like a status symbol. Tommy had made comments during the orientation week about bringing real standards back to competitive shooting, whatever that meant. At exactly 8 a.m., Bull Patterson filled the doorway like a wall of muscle and attitude. He swept his gaze across the assembled students with obvious calculation, his eyes lingering on Sarah with barely concealed skepticism. "Listen up, people," Bull barked, his voice echoing off the warehouse walls. "This isn't a weekend shooting club, and I'm not your buddy. Half of you will wash out in the first month. The other half will quit when you realize competitive shooting isn't like hunting deer or plinking at beer cans." His eyes found Sarah, taking in her discount gear and worn boots. "Some of you are here because you think military service automatically makes you competitive shooters. Others," he paused, staring directly at Sarah, "are here because you've confused maintaining weapons with actually using them at championship levels." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her expression neutral. Around her, she sensed the other students' interest, like wolves detecting weakness in prey. "Chen," Bull called out, consulting his clipboard. "Step forward." Sarah stood and walked to the front of the room, her boots echoing on the concrete floor. Every eye in the room was on her, measuring her slight frame against their preconceptions about serious competitors. "You worked maintenance at Fort Carson, right? Fixed a few rifles in your time?" "Yes, sir." 8 years active duty Army, 3 years as a civilian contractor. Bull nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Let me explain something to you, Chen. Cleaning weapons and shooting them competitively are two completely different skill sets. Just because you can strip down an M4 and diagnose mechanical problems doesn't mean you can handle the pressure of championship-level competition." The message was crystal clear. Sarah didn't belong here among serious competitors. But Bull wasn't finished with his demonstration. "Anyone else here have maintenance experience?" Bull asked the room. When no one responded, he smiled coldly. "Good. Real competitors understand that knowing how to fix something doesn't qualify you to excel with it. A mechanic doesn't get to race Formula One just because he can rebuild engines." Several students chuckled at the comparison. Sarah felt her face burning but forced herself to remain calm. She'd dealt with instructors like Bull before, small men who used their authority to compensate for their own insecurities and prejudices. "Now," Bull continued, "let's talk about what separates champions from wannabes. Competitive shooting requires natural talent, mental toughness, and physical attributes that can't be taught. You either have championship potential or you don't. No amount of military training or mechanical knowledge can substitute for raw shooting ability." As Bull droned on about the superiority of natural talent over experience, Sarah noticed another instructor watching from the doorway. The woman was in her 30s with short blonde hair and the confident posture of someone comfortable with high-powered rifles. Unlike Bull, Her expression showed concern rather than amusement at the public humiliation taking place. Bull finally dismissed them for their first practical session. Sarah felt like she'd been through a hazing ritual, designed to establish hierarchy. The other students avoided eye contact as they filed out, already learning to distance themselves from the instructor's chosen target. The blonde instructor approached as Sarah gathered her notebook. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Amy Harrison," she sighed quietly. "I teach advanced ballistics and tactical shooting here. Sarah Chen." Amy glanced toward Bull's office, then back to Sarah. "Don't let him get under your skin. Bull has his own ideas about who belongs on championship ranges, but he doesn't speak for everyone here." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak without revealing how rattled she felt. "Your first live-fire session is in 20 minutes, Amy continued. "Range 3. Fair warning, Bull likes to make the first session extra challenging for certain students. Just remember that one session doesn't prove anything about competitive potential." As Amy walked away, Sarah realized she'd found her first potential ally. But she also understood that Bull's campaign against her was just beginning, and he held all the institutional power. The harassment started immediately during equipment assignment. Sarah's designated shooting station always seemed to have issues wobbly. Rests, misaligned spotting scopes, and targets that needed replacement. While other students completed their setup in 10 minutes, Sarah spent 30 minutes documenting problems and requesting repairs. During the first marksmanship drill, Bull positioned himself directly behind Sarah's station, offering loud commentary on her technique. "Inconsistent breathing pattern, Chen. Natural shooters don't have to think about fundamentals this much." When Sarah's first group measured 0.8 inches at 100 meters, well within competitive standards, Bull dismissed the performance. "Anyone can get lucky with a few shots. Championship shooting requires consistency under pressure." Tommy Kowalski, whose best group measured 2.3 inches, received praise for his natural shooting instincts and competitive mindset. The double standard was obvious to anyone paying attention, but Bull controlled the narrative and the evaluations. During breaks, conversations would stop when Sarah approached, then resume with discussions about diversity programs and lowered standards. The other students quickly learned to mirror Bull's attitude, treating Sarah as an outsider who didn't deserve their respect or friendship. The only bright spot was Amy Harrison, who made a point of including Sarah in technical discussions about ballistics and precision shooting theory. During a break between drills, Amy approached with a rangefinder and ballistics calculator. "I've been watching your shooting," Amy said quietly. "Your fundamentals are solid and your groups are consistently better than half the class. Don't let Bull's politics mess with your confidence." Sarah appreciated the support, but she understood the reality of her situation. Bull Patterson held all the power in this environment, and he'd already decided she didn't belong among serious competitors. The question was whether she could survive his campaign long enough to prove him wrong. As the first day concluded, Sarah gathered her gear while listening to the other students discuss their performance with Bull. Everyone received encouragement and constructive feedback except her. Sarah's consistently tight groups were dismissed as beginner's luck, while Tani's wild shots were praised as aggressive competitive spirit. Walking to her car, Sarah felt the familiar weight of institutional bias settling on her shoulders. She'd faced this before in the military, where competence was often secondary to politics and prejudice. But she'd survived that environment and even thrived despite the obstacles. Patterson thought he was dealing with just another diversity admission trying to play in a man's sport. He had no idea he'd just declared war on someone who'd been fighting uphill battles her entire adult life. Sarah Chen hadn't survived 8 years in the Army and 3 years of post-military struggles just to be intimidated by a small-town shooting instructor with authority issues. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Sarah was ready for whatever Bull could throw at her. She'd been underestimated before, and those experiences had only made her more determined to prove that excellence recognized no gender, background, or economic status. Bull Patterson was about to learn that targeting Sarah Chen was the biggest mistake of his instructional career. The harassment intensified during Sarah's second week at Colorado State Shooting Academy. What had started as subtle discrimination evolved into systematic sabotage designed to break her spirit and justify her removal from the program. Bull Patterson had decided Sarah didn't belong among serious competitors, and he was willing to abuse his authority to prove that point. Sarah's assigned equipment always seemed to have mysterious problems that materialized overnight. Her shooting rest would develop loose joints that affected stability. Her spotting scope would be knocked out of alignment between sessions. Target frames at her assigned lanes would be damaged or positioned incorrectly, forcing extended setup times that ate into her practice sessions. While other students completed their pre-shooting preparations in 15 minutes, Sarah spent 45 minutes documenting discrepancies and requesting replacements. The equipment issues mysteriously resolved themselves when Bull's preferred students used the same gear later in the day. During advanced marksmanship drills, Bull would position himself directly behind Sarah's shooting station, offering constant criticism disguised as instruction. His voice carried across the range, ensuring everyone heard his commentary on her technique. Inconsistent follow-through, Chen, Bull announced after Sarah fired a group that measured 0.6 inches at 200 meters. Championship shooters don't have to think about fundamentals. Natural ability makes these movements automatic. When Tommy Kowalski fired a 2.1-inch group from the same distance, Bull praised his aggressive competitive instinct and natural shooting rhythm. The double standard was glaring to anyone paying attention. But Bull controlled the narrative and the official evaluations. Sarah found herself eating lunch alone while other students clustered around Bull, hanging on his war stories about competitive shooting championships and military sniper missions. The social isolation was deliberate and effective. Bull was teaching his students that Sarah was an outsider who didn't deserve their respect or friendship. Some people think military service automatically qualifies them for competitive shooting, Tommy said loudly during one lunch break, clearly intending for Sarah to hear. But there's a huge difference between basic marksmanship and championship-level precision. His comment drew nods and chuckles from other students who'd learned to mirror Bull's attitudes. Jake Morrison, whose family owned a firearms manufacturing company, made pointed observations about diversity programs and lowered standards whenever Sarah was within earshot. "My dad says the sport's changing," Jake announced during equipment cleanup. "Used to be about pure skill and natural talent. Now everyone thinks they deserve participation trophies just for showing up." The message was clear. Sarah was a diversity admission who didn't understand her place in the competitive shooting hierarchy. But the psychological warfare only strengthened Sarah's determination to prove them wrong through superior performance. During a precision shooting exercise designed to test consistency under pressure, Sarah fired 10 consecutive shots that measured an aggregate group size of 0.89 inches at 300 meters. The performance was exceptional by any standard, demonstrating the kind of precision that separated recreational shooters from serious competitors. Bull studied the target through his spotting scope, his expression growing darker as he confirmed the measurement. Around the range, other instructors and students had stopped their activities to observe Sarah's shooting, murmuring appreciation for the technical skill on display. "Adequate performance, Chen," Bull announced dismissively. "Though I notice your shooting position isn't textbook perfect. Championship competitors maintain classical form regardless of conditions." Sarah had been shooting from a modified prone position that accommodated her smaller frame while maximizing stability and comfort. The technique was unconventional but effective, allowing her to maintain consistent groups that exceeded most students' capabilities. "Sir, my position provides optimal bone support and natural point of aim for my body mechanics," Sarah replied. Respectfully, "The results demonstrate effective technique adaptation." Bull's face reddened at the implicit challenge to his criticism. "Chen, I've been shooting competitively for 20 years. I think I know proper form when I see it. Your improvised technique might work for military qualifying, but championship shooting requires adherence to established fundamentals." Despite Bull's dismissal, Amy Harrison had been observing from the 400-meter range, watching Sarah's shooting through high-powered optics. That evening, Amy approached Sarah with a tablet displaying ballistic analysis software. "I recorded your shooting session today," Amy said quietly. "Your consistency index was 0.92, which puts you in the top 5% of competitive shooters nationwide. Your modified shooting position actually improves your natural point of aim by 3 degrees. Sarah stared at the objective data, seeing scientific proof of what she already knew. Her technique wasn't just effective, it was superior to conventional methods for her body type and shooting style. "Why is Bull so determined to wash me out?" Sarah asked. "My performance speaks for itself." Amy's expression was grim. "Because he believes certain people don't belong in competitive shooting, and he's willing to corrupt the training process to prove that point. Bull's been here for 15 years, and he's never had his methods questioned. He thinks institutional authority gives him the right to decide who deserves opportunities." Sarah felt something cold and focused settling in her chest. Bull wasn't just discriminating against her personally, he was undermining the integrity of competitive shooting to serve his prejudices. "What do we do about it?" Sarah asked. Amy smiled grimly. "We document everything. Every biased evaluation, every safety violation, every instance of equipment sabotage. When Bull finally crosses a line that even the Academy administration can't ignore, we'll be ready with evidence." Sarah nodded, feeling like she finally had a battle plan. But she also understood that Bull's campaign was about to escalate. Men like Bull Patterson didn't back down when challenged. They doubled down on their convictions and increased pressure until their targets either broke or fought back. The breaking point came during Sarah's first competitive simulation exercise, designed to replicate championship-level pressure and scoring. Bull had scheduled Sarah's session during the worst possible conditions, high winds and variable lighting that challenged even experienced competitors. As Sarah prepared for the exercise, she discovered that her assigned rifle had been switched overnight. Instead of her personal precision weapon, she was given one of the Academy's training rifles, a well-used instrument with unknown characteristics and questionable maintenance history. "Equipment failure is part of competitive shooting," Bull announced when Sarah raised concerns about the rifle switch. "Championship shooters adapt to any weapon and conditions. Maybe you're just looking for excuses because you're nervous about performing under pressure." Sarah realized what was happening. Bull was setting her up for failure with deliberately compromised equipment, but refusing the challenge would give him the excuse he needed to recommend her dismissal from the program. "I'll complete the exercise as scheduled," Sarah said evenly. "But I'm documenting the equipment change for the official record." Bull's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "You do that, Chen. I'm sure the Academy administration will be very interested in your concerns about standard training procedures." As Sarah loaded the unfamiliar rifle and prepared for the most important shooting exercise of her civilian career, she carried with her 8 years of military precision, 3 years of suppressed ambition, and a lifetime of turning obstacles into opportunities. Bull Patterson thought he was about to watch Sarah Chun's dreams die on his shooting range. He had no idea he was about to witness a demonstration of skill that would expose his prejudice and destroy his credibility in front of the entire Academy. The real war was about to begin. Sarah spent 15 minutes familiarizing herself with the Academy's training rifle, a well-worn Remington 700 that had seen better decades. The bolt action felt loose, the trigger had an inconsistent pull weight, and the scope showed signs of being dropped multiple times. Any serious competitor would have rejected this weapon for important shooting exercises. But Sarah understood that. Boa was testing her resolve as much as her marksmanship skills. The competitive simulation exercise required hitting targets at distances from 100 to 600 meters under time pressure, simulating the stress and precision demands of championship events. Other students had completed the course using their personal rifles, precision instruments worth more than Sarah's annual salary. She was expected to match their performance with a weapon that belonged in a museum rather than a competitive range. "Chen!" Bull's voice boomed across the range. "You're burning daylight with all that fiddling. Championship shooters adapt quickly to any equipment. Time to see if you can perform under real pressure instead of making excuses." Sarah settled into her shooting position, feeling the unfamiliar stock against her shoulder and the loose trigger. Under her finger, through the questionable scope, she could see her first target 100 meters downrange. A small bullseye that demanded sub-OA precision to score maximum points. Around the range, other students and instructors had gathered to watch Sarah's exercise. Word had spread about Bull's challenge to the military maintenance girl, and everyone wanted to see if she could back up her previous performances with a compromised weapon. Sarah controlled her breathing and focused on the fundamentals that had carried her through 8 years of military shooting. Sight alignment, trigger control, follow-through techniques that transcended any particular weapon system. The rifle might be substandard, but the principles of precision shooting remained constant. Her first shot broke cleanly, the unfamiliar trigger surprising her with its sudden release. Through the scope, she watched the bullet impact dead center in the bullseye. The gathered crowd murmured appreciatively, but Sarah knew one good shot proved nothing about sustained performance. The second target appeared at 200 meters, requiring quick transition and range estimation. Sarah worked the bolt smoothly, chambering a fresh round while maintaining her shooting position. The loose action felt uncertain in her hands, but she'd trained with worse equipment during military deployments. Shot 2 impacted slightly left of center, still within the scoring ring, but not perfect. Sarah made a mental note about the rifle's tendency to pull left and continued to the 300-meter target. Each shot taught her more about the weapon's characteristics information she'd need for the longer-range targets that would truly test her abilities. "Inconsistent grouping, Chen," Bull announced loudly. "Quality shooters maintain precision regardless of equipment challenges. Maybe the pressure's getting to you." Sarah ignored the commentary, focusing entirely on the shooting problem in front of her. Target 3 at 300 meters required precise elevation adjustment and wind compensation. The aging scope's turrets felt gritty and imprecise, but Sarah had learned to work with substandard equipment throughout her military career. Shot 3 hit high and right, still scoring but not centered. Sarah was beginning to understand the rifle's personality. It shot consistently high and pulled slightly left, probably due to a worn barrel or loose bedding. Armed with this knowledge, she could compensate for the remaining targets. The 400-meter target demanded everything Sarah had learned about external ballistics and environmental conditions. Wind speed was variable, shifting between 8 and 12 miles per hour from the northwest. The damaged scope made precise aiming difficult, but Sarah had been shooting in challenging conditions long before she owned quality optics. She held slightly low and left, compensating for the rifle's known tendencies, while accounting for wind drift. The shot felt good leaving the barrel, and Sarah watched through the scope as the bullet impacted dead center in the scoring ring. "Lucky shot," Tommy Kowalski muttered, loud enough for nearby students to hear. "Real competitors don't rely on luck." The 500-meter target pushed the training rifle beyond its intended capabilities. The old scope lacked the clarity needed for precise aiming at that distance, and the rifle's accuracy limitations became more pronounced with range. Sarah was essentially shooting with one hand tied behind her back, but she'd never back down. From a challenge in her life, she estimated the additional holdover needed for the increased distance, factoring in the rifle's high shooting tendency and the crosswind that had picked up over the past few minutes. The trigger broke crisply, and Sarah watched the bullet's vapor trail arc toward the distant target. Impact was slightly low, but still within the scoring zone. Not perfect, but demonstrating competence with a weapon that had no business being used for precision shooting at extended range. Marginal performance at best, Bull announced to the assembled crowd. Championship shooting requires consistent precision, not occasional lucky hits. Perhaps Chen should consider returning to equipment maintenance where her skills are more appropriate. The final target sat at 600 meters, the maximum distance for the exercise and far beyond what the training rifle was designed to handle accurately. Sarah knew this shot would be more about demonstrating principle than achieving perfect precision. The old rifle simply lacked the mechanical accuracy needed for consistent hits at that range. But Sarah Chen had never been one to quit before the job was finished. She studied the distant target through the inadequate scope, calculated holdover and wind compensation, and settled into her final shooting position. Amy Harrison had been watching the entire exercise through high-powered spotting optics, documenting Sarah's performance and the obvious equipment disadvantage she was facing. What she'd witnessed was remarkable, a demonstration of fundamental marksmanship skills that transcended any particular weapon system. She's compensating for equipment deficiencies in real time, Amy murmured to another instructor. Most competitive shooters couldn't adapt that quickly to an unfamiliar rifle. As Sarah prepared for her final shot, Bull Patterson stood behind her with obvious satisfaction. He believed he was about to witness the failure that would justify removing Sarah from the program. The aging rifle had performed exactly as expected, marginally accurate at best and wholly inadequate for serious competitive shooting. But Bull had made a fundamental miscalculation. He'd assumed that Sarah's competence depended on having premium equipment, like the recreational shooters he was accustomed to teaching. He had no understanding of someone who'd learned to excel with whatever tools were available, regardless of their condition or suitability. Sarah's final shot broke cleanly, the old rifle bucking against her shoulder one last time. Through the scope, she watched the bullet impact just outside the center ring, but still within the scoring zone. 6 shots, 6 hits. Despite using a weapon that belonged in a training museum rather than a competitive range, the gathered crowd fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah had just demonstrated marksmanship skills that exceeded most of their capabilities, using equipment they wouldn't have considered suitable for recreational shooting, much less competitive exercises. Bull Patterson stared at the target results with growing anger. His plan to humiliate Sarah had backfired, instead showcasing her exceptional adaptability and fundamental shooting skills. Worse, he'd exposed his own prejudice in front of academy staff and students who were beginning to question his judgment. The exercise was over, but the real confrontation was just beginning. Bull Patterson had pushed Sarah Chen as far as he could, without completely abandoning any pretense of professional instruction. Now he faced a choice: acknowledge her competence or escalate his campaign to levels that would expose his discrimination to Academy administration. Sarah gathered her gear, knowing she'd just passed a test that Bull never intended her to pass. But she also understood that humiliating a man like Bull Patterson only made him more dangerous. The next challenge would be even worse, and Bull would make sure of it. The war for Sarah's future was about to reach its climax. Sarah's performance with the defective rifle had created ripples throughout Colorado State Shooting Academy that Bull Patterson couldn't ignore or suppress. Word spread quickly among students and instructors about the military veteran who'd scored Consistent hits at 600 meters using equipment that most recreational shooters would have rejected for basic practice sessions. Amy Harrison had documented everything, capturing Sarah's shooting through high-powered spotting scopes and recording the obvious equipment sabotage that preceded the exercise. That evening, she approached Sarah in the academy parking lot with a folder full of evidence and a grim expression. "I've been building a case against Boole for 8 months, Amy said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "You're not his first target, Sarah, just his most visible one." Amy opened the folder, revealing photographs, audio recordings, and sworn statements from former students who'd been driven out of the program through similar harassment campaigns. Sarah stared at the documentation, realizing she was part of a pattern that stretched back years. "Why didn't anyone report this earlier?" Sarah asked. Amy's expression was pained. "Because Boole has friends in the competitive shooting community and connections with academy administration. Previous complaints were dismissed as sour grapes from students who couldn't handle championship-level training. But your situation is different." She pulled out a tablet displaying ballistic analysis software. "I've recorded every one of your shooting sessions. Your consistency indices, group measurements, and technical scores all rank in the top 10% of competitive shooters nationwide. The objective data proves that Boole's evaluations are fraudulent." Sarah studied the charts and graphs showing her actual performance versus Boole's recorded assessments. The discrepancies were shocking. Boole had consistently downgraded her scores by 40 to 60% while inflating evaluations for his preferred students. "He's not just discriminating," Sarah realized. "He's falsifying official training records." "Exactly. And falsifying federal shooting sport certifications is a serious violation that could destroy the academy's accreditation. Boole's prejudice is putting the entire institution at risk." Amy explained that she'd been carefully documenting Boole's behavior while building relationships with other instructors who'd grown uncomfortable with his methods. The academy employed 12 certified instructors, and at least 6 had expressed concerns about Boole's treatment of certain students. "We need one more major incident," Amy continued. "Something so egregious that even Boole's political protection can't save him. When that happens, we'll have enough evidence to trigger a full investigation by the National Rifle Association's Ethics Committee." Sarah felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. She'd survived Boole's harassment so far, but escalating the conflict would make her an even bigger target. Men like Boole didn't back down when challenged. They doubled down and increased pressure until their opponents either broke or fought back decisively. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Boole announced during the weekly instructor meeting that the academy would be hosting a special demonstration for potential corporate sponsors, wealthy individuals and companies considering major financial investments in competitive shooting programs. "We need to showcase our best students," Boole declared, his eyes finding Sarah across the room. "This demonstration will separate serious competitors from recreational shooters. Only students who meet championship standards will be selected to represent the academy. The selection process would involve a comprehensive shooting evaluation designed to test every aspect of competitive marksmanship: precision, speed, adaptability, and performance under pressure. Boole would personally oversee the evaluation, and his recommendations would determine which students earned the privilege of representing Colorado State Shooting Academy. Sarah understood immediately what Boole was planning. This wasn't about selecting the best students, it was about creating a public forum where he could humiliate her in front of influential witnesses, justifying her removal from the program while appearing to maintain objective standards. Amy pulled Sarah aside after the meeting. "He's setting you up for a spectacular failure in front of people who could destroy your reputation in competitive shooting circles. If he succeeds, you'll never get another opportunity in this sport." But Sarah had survived 8 years of military politics, and 3 years of post-service discrimination. She understood that running from this confrontation would only validate Bull's prejudices and empower him to target future students. "What if I don't just survive his test?" Sarah asked. "What if I excel so dramatically that he can't explain away my performance?" Amy studied Sarah's determined expression. "You'd be taking an enormous risk. Bull controls every aspect of the evaluation equipment assignments, shooting conditions, even the scoring criteria. He could set up conditions that make success virtually impossible." "Then we make sure everything is documented," Sarah replied. "Official observers, recorded performances, independent verification of equipment, and scoring. If Bull wants a public demonstration, we make sure it's completely transparent." Amy smiled grimly. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. I've been waiting 8 months for someone with the skills and courage to take Bull on directly. Most students just try to survive his harassment until graduation." They spent the next hour planning their strategy. Amy would arrange for independent observers from other shooting academies to witness the demonstration. She'd also ensure that all performances were recorded using high-speed cameras and precision timing equipment that couldn't be manipulated. Bull's greatest weakness is his arrogance, Amy explained. He genuinely believes his prejudices are justified, so he won't expect you to perform at championship levels. When you do, he'll have no explanation that doesn't expose his bias. Sarah felt the familiar calm that came before major challenges. She'd faced down insurgents in Afghanistan, navigated military bureaucracy, and survived 3 years of professional discrimination. Bull Patterson was just another obstacle between her and her goals. "There's something else you should know," Amy said quietly. "I've been in contact with Rachel Martinez from the National Rifle Association's Ethics Division. She's been tracking complaints about discriminatory practices in competitive shooting programs nationwide. If we can provide ironclad evidence of Bull's misconduct, she's prepared to launch a full investigation." Sarah nodded, understanding that this demonstration would determine not just her future, but potentially the futures of countless other students who might face similar discrimination. Bull Patterson had chosen the wrong target for his prejudice, and he was about to learn that Sarah Chen never backed down from a fight she could win. "When is this demonstration scheduled?" Sarah asked. 2 weeks from Friday. Bull's arranging for representatives from 3 major sporting goods companies, 2 Olympic training centers, and a documentary film crew. He wants maximum visibility for what he expects to be your public failure. Sarah smiled coldly. Bull Patterson was about to get the public demonstration he'd requested. But instead of watching Sarah Chun's dreams die on his shooting range, he was going to witness the performance that would end his career and expose his corrupt practices to the entire competitive shooting community. The real war was about to begin, and Sarah Chun intended to win it decisively, preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Bull Patterson's announcement of the corporate demonstration had transformed the Academy's atmosphere overnight. Students who'd previously treated Sarah with casual dismissal now watched her with open hostility, understanding that her presence threatened their own opportunities to impress potential sponsors and advance their competitive careers. Tommy Kowalski became particularly aggressive in his comments, making pointed observations about diversity quotas and unqualified participants. Whenever Sarah was within earshot, during equipment cleaning sessions, he'd loudly discuss the importance of maintaining standards and not allowing political correctness to compromise competitive integrity. "My dad sponsors 3 Olympic hopefuls," Tommy announced during one lunch break, ensuring his voice carried across the common area. "He says the sport's being ruined by people who think participation medals are the same as earning your place through talent and dedication." Jake Morrison joined the psychological warfare campaign, sharing stories about competitive shooters. who'd been promoted beyond their abilities only to embarrass themselves and their sponsors during major competitions. The message was clear. Sarah was a diversity admission who didn't understand the humiliation she was about to face. Boole escalated his harassment campaign to levels that bordered on open sabotage. Sarah's practice sessions were scheduled during the worst possible weather conditions: high winds, variable lighting, and temperature extremes that challenged even experienced competitors. While other students practiced during ideal morning conditions, Sarah was assigned afternoon slots when heat shimmer and wind gusts made precision shooting nearly impossible. Her equipment assignments became increasingly problematic. Rifles would develop mysterious mechanical issues: overnight loose scope mounts, inconsistent triggers, and bedding problems that affected accuracy. When Sarah reported these defects, Boole would inspect the weapons personally and declare them perfectly functional. "Equipment problems are often shooter problems, Chen," Boole announced after Sarah documented trigger inconsistencies in her assigned rifle. "Championship competitors adapt to any weapon characteristics. Maybe you need to focus on fundamentals instead of making excuses." Amy Harrison observed these incidents with growing anger, documenting each instance of deliberate sabotage while building her case for intervention. She'd begun secretly recording Boole's comments during instructor meetings, capturing his increasingly explicit statements about maintaining program integrity and preventing unqualified students from embarrassing the academy. "We can't let political correctness destroy competitive shooting," Boole declared during one recorded meeting. "Some people need to understand that wanting something doesn't mean you deserve it. My job is protecting the sport's reputation, even if that makes me unpopular with certain groups." The most serious escalation came during Sarah's qualification session for the corporate demonstration. Boole had scheduled her evaluation for a day when weather conditions were borderline dangerous: sustained winds exceeding 25 miles per hour, with gusts reaching 35 miles per hour. Professional competitions would have been postponed under such conditions, but Boole insisted the session proceed as scheduled. "Real competitors perform regardless of conditions," Boole announced as Sarah struggled to maintain stable shooting positions in the buffeting wind. "Championship shooting isn't a fair weather sport." Sarah's assigned rifle for the qualification was a weapon she'd never seen before: an older model with unfamiliar characteristics and questionable maintenance history. The scope was obviously damaged, with internal elements that rattled when moved, and the trigger had a heavy, inconsistent pull that made precise shooting nearly impossible. Despite these handicaps, Sarah managed to complete the qualification course with scores that exceeded minimum requirements. Her groups measured larger than usual due to the extreme conditions and compromised equipment, but she demonstrated competence under circumstances that would have challenged Olympic-level competitors. Boole studied her targets with obvious disappointment. He'd clearly expected the combination of weather and equipment problems to result in complete failure, providing justification for excluding Sarah from the demonstration. Instead, she'd proven once again that fundamental marksmanship skills could overcome deliberate sabotage. "Marginal performance at best," Boole announced to the assembled observers. "Qualification scores are barely adequate, and the group sizes indicate serious consistency problems. I have significant concerns about representing the academy with substandard shooting." Amy Harrison had been monitoring the session through spotting scopes, recording Sarah's actual performance and the obvious equipment manipulation that preceded the qualification. The weather data alone proved that Boole had scheduled the session under conditions that violated basic safety protocols. That evening, Amy approached Sarah with additional evidence of Boole's escalating misconduct. "He's documented 3 equipment failures in your assigned rifles over the past week," Amy explained, showing maintenance logs. "But those same weapons performed perfectly when other students used them the following day." Sarah studied the evidence, seeing a clear pattern of deliberate equipment sabotage designed to undermine her performance. Bull wasn't just showing favoritism, he was actively manufacturing failure to support his discriminatory agenda. He's also been spreading rumors about your military service, Amy continued grimly, claiming you were discharged for safety violations and equipment misuse. None of it's true, but he's damaging your reputation within the competitive shooting community. Sarah felt cold anger settling in her chest. Bull's campaign had evolved beyond simple harassment into character assassination designed to destroy her career prospects throughout the sport. He was willing to commit fraud and spread false information to eliminate someone he considered unworthy of competitive opportunities. "What's our next move?" Sarah asked. Amy pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact number. "Rachel Martinez from the NRA Ethics Division has been monitoring our communications. She's ready to launch an official investigation if we can provide." One more instance of clear misconduct. The corporate demonstration, Sarah realized. Exactly. Bull's arrogance will be his downfall. He'll want to humiliate you publicly in front of influential witnesses, which means he'll have to escalate his sabotage to levels that can't be explained away as normal training challenges. Amy outlined their strategy for the demonstration. Independent. Observers would document every aspect of Sarah's performance using calibrated equipment that couldn't be manipulated. High-speed cameras would record her shooting technique, while precision chronographs measured bullet velocities to detect equipment problems. "We'll also have representatives from 3 other shooting academies observing," Amy explained. "Bull won't be able to control the narrative when objective witnesses verify your performance." Sarah understood that the demonstration would be her only opportunity to expose Bull's discrimination while proving her competitive abilities. Success would vindicate years of struggle and open doors throughout the shooting sports community. Failure would validate Bull's prejudices and effectively end her competitive career before it began. "There's one more thing," Amy said quietly. "I've been in contact with Captain Jessica Torres from the Army Marksmanship Unit. She's following your situation and expressed interest in evaluating your potential for military competitive shooting programs." Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with determination. The demonstration wasn't just about proving Bull Patterson wrong, it was about opening opportunities she'd never imagined possible. Elite military shooting programs represented the pinnacle of competitive marksmanship, reserved for athletes capable of Olympic-level performance. "When Bull sabotages your equipment for the demonstration," Amy continued, "you'll have the chance to prove that excellence transcends any particular weapon or conditions." That's exactly the kind of adaptability military programs value most. As Sarah prepared for the most important shooting performance of her life, she carried with her 8 years of military precision, 3 years of civilian determination, and a lifetime of proving that competence recognized no gender, background, or economic status. Bull Patterson thought he was arranging Sarah Chun's public humiliation. Instead, he was setting the stage for a demonstration that would expose his prejudice, validate her abilities, and launch her toward opportunities he'd never imagined she deserved. The corporate demonstration was 5 days away, and Sarah intended to make it unforgettable. The morning of the corporate demonstration arrived with typical Colorado sunshine and deceptively calm winds. Sarah arrived at the academy 2 hours early, carrying her personal gear and a quiet determination that had sustained her through 8 years of military service and 3 years of civilian struggles. Today would determine whether her dreams of competitive shooting greatness would become reality or die under Bull Patterson's prejudice. The academy buzzed with unusual activity as corporate representatives and industry observers gathered for what Bull had promoted as a showcase of elite marksmanship training. Representatives from 3 major sporting goods companies mingled with Olympic Training Center scouts and documentary filmmakers, all eager to identify the next generation of competitive shooting talent. Bull moved through the crowd like a proud host, introducing his favorite students and highlighting their achievements. Tommy Kowalski received particular attention, with Bull emphasizing his natural competitive instincts and championship potential to anyone within earshot. Jake Morrison was praised for his technical precision and dedication to excellence. Sarah noticed that Bull hadn't mentioned her participation to any of the corporate observers. She was conspicuously absent from his introductory presentations, treated like an afterthought rather than a legitimate competitor in the demonstration. Amy Harrison approached Sarah during the pre-demonstration briefing, her expression tense. With anticipation. "Everything's in place," she whispered. "Independent observers, recording equipment, and Rachel Martinez is monitoring remotely through secure video feed. Whatever Bull tries today will be completely documented." The demonstration format had been designed to showcase different aspects of competitive marksmanship. Students would rotate through precision shooting, rapid-fire exercises, moving target challenges, and adaptive shooting scenarios that tested versatility under changing conditions. Corporate observers would evaluate each participant's potential. For sponsorship and advanced training opportunities, Bull announced the equipment assignments with obvious satisfaction. His preferred students received premium rifles with match-grade optics and precision-tuned triggers. Sarah was assigned a weapon she'd never seen before, an aging bolt-action rifle with a scope that appeared to have been dropped multiple times, and a stock that showed obvious damage from years of rough handling. Equipment adaptability is crucial in competitive shooting, Bull announced to the gathered observers. Champions must excel regardless of weapon characteristics or environmental conditions. Today's demonstration will separate natural talent from mere technical knowledge. Sarah examined her assigned rifle with growing concern. The scope was loose in its mounts, the trigger felt gritty and inconsistent, and the bolt action showed signs of serious wear. This wasn't just substandard equipment. It was a weapon that had no business being used in any serious shooting exercise. Range Master James Mitchell, one of the independent observers Amy had arranged, approached Sarah. During equipment inspection, "Miss Chen, I need to document your weapon's condition for the official record. Are you comfortable proceeding with this rifle?" Sarah understood the implicit question. Mitchell was offering her an opportunity to withdraw from the demonstration, rather than face public humiliation with obviously compromised equipment. But backing down now would validate every prejudice Bull had expressed about her capabilities. "I'll complete the demonstration as scheduled," Sarah replied firmly. "But I want the weapon's condition documented for the record." Mitchell nodded, grimly, photographing the rifle's damaged components and noting the obvious maintenance deficiencies that should have removed it from service. His documentation would provide crucial evidence of deliberate sabotage. Regardless of Sarah's performance, the first stage of the demonstration involved precision shooting at 100, 200, and 300 meters. Participants had 3 shots at each distance, with scoring based on group size and accuracy. Bull's favored students performed well with their premium equipment, producing respectable groups that impressed the corporate observers. When Sarah's turn arrived, Bull positioned himself where his commentary would carry to the observation area. "Chen represents our veteran outreach program," he announced dismissively. "Military marksmanship provides a foundation, but competitive shooting requires different skills entirely." Sarah settled into her shooting position, feeling the damaged rifle's awkward balance and inconsistent stock fit. Through the loose scope, she could barely make out the 100-meter target clearly enough for precise aiming. The trigger required nearly twice the pressure of a properly adjusted competition. Rifle. Her first shot impacted high and left of center, still within the scoring ring but not the precision demanded by competitive standards. Around the observation area, she heard murmurs of disappointment and Bull's satisfied commentary about the challenges of transitioning from military to competitive shooting. "Inconsistent fundamentals," Bull announced loudly. "Natural competitors maintain precision regardless of equipment variations." Technical knowledge can't substitute for instinctive shooting ability. Sarah's second shot hit closer to center as she adapted to the rifle's characteristics, but the damaged scope made precise aiming nearly impossible. Her third shot wandered slightly right, completing a group that measured nearly 2 inches, adequate for hunting, but embarrassing by competitive standards. Bull's satisfaction was obvious as he announced Sarah's scores to the corporate observers. "Military training provides basic competency," he explained. "But championship shooting requires natural talents that can't be taught through technical instruction." The second stage involved rapid-fire exercises where participants had 90 seconds to engage multiple targets at varying distances. Speed and accuracy were equally important, testing both technical skills and performance under time pressure. Sarah's assigned position for the rapid-fire stage placed her directly in front of the corporate observation area, ensuring maximum visibility for what Bull expected to be her most spectacular failure. The damaged rifle's bolt action stuck intermittently, requiring extra force to cycle rounds and eating precious seconds from her time allowance. Despite the equipment problems, Sarah completed the exercise within the time limit, hitting 18 of 20 targets with her compromised weapon. Several shots missed by narrow margins due to the scope's inconsistent tracking, but her fundamental marksmanship skills allowed her to adapt in real time to the rifle's deficiencies. "Adequate performance under ideal conditions," Bull announced. Though the weather was actually challenging with variable winds gusting to 15 miles per hour. Championship competitors must excel regardless of environmental factors. The corporate observers were beginning to notice the disparity between Bull's commentary and Sarah's actual performance. Despite using obviously inferior equipment, she was keeping pace with students who had significant advantages in rifle quality and preparation time. Amy Harrison watched from the sidelines, documenting every instance of equipment sabotage and biased commentary. The evidence was mounting rapidly, but the real test was yet to come. Bull had saved the most challenging exercise for last, the moving target challenge that would determine which students earned corporate sponsorship consideration. "The final stage will test adaptive shooting skills," Bull announced to the gathered observers. Participants must engage 15 moving targets at distances from 50 to 400 meters. This exercise separates recreational shooters from championship-caliber competitors. Sarah felt her pulse steady as she prepared for the most important shooting challenge of her civilian career. Bull Patterson had arranged every possible disadvantage, from compromised equipment to biased commentary designed to undermine her credibility. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that Sarah's competence depended on having favorable conditions and premium equipment. Bull had no understanding of someone who'd learned to excel with whatever tools were available, regardless of their condition or suitability for the task at hand. The moving target challenge was about to begin, and Sarah Chen intended to give the corporate observers a demonstration they'd never forget. Bull Patterson was about to learn that targeting someone with Sarah's background and determination was the biggest mistake of his professional career. The broken rifle in her hands was about to become the instrument of his complete humiliation. The moving target challenge represented the pinnacle of competitive marksmanship, a test that separated recreational shooters from world-class athletes. 15 clay pigeons would be launched at irregular intervals from concealed throwers positioned across the range, simulating the unpredictable nature of hunting and tactical shooting scenarios that demanded instant target acquisition and flawless execution under pressure. Bull Patterson had saved this challenge for last because he knew it would be impossible for Sarah to succeed with her damaged rifle. Moving targets required split-second timing, precise lead calculations, and equipment that tracked smoothly through rapid movements. The loose scope and sticky bolt action of Sarah's assigned weapon made such performance virtually impossible. Corporate observers gathered around the elevated viewing platform, Their attention focused on what Bull had promoted as the ultimate test of competitive shooting talent. Representatives from Olympic training centers positioned themselves with spotting scopes and timing equipment, ready to evaluate potential recruits for national-level programs. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bull announced with obvious confidence, "this final challenge will demonstrate the difference between technical competency and championship potential. Moving targets demand instinctive shooting ability that cannot be taught through conventional instruction." Sarah stepped to the firing line, feeling the weight of the damaged rifle and the expectations of everyone watching. Amy Harrison had positioned herself where she could document everything through high-definition cameras, while Range Master Mitchell stood ready to verify target hits using electronic scoring systems. The first clay pigeon launched without warning, from a thrower positioned 150 meters to Sarah's left, arcing across the range at typical game bird speed. Sarah swung the rifle smoothly, leading the target while fighting the scope's tendency to shift in its loose mounts. The damaged optic made precise aiming nearly impossible, forcing her to rely on instinctive shooting skills developed through years of military training. Her first shot shattered the clay target in a cloud of orange dust, drawing surprised murmurs from the corporate observers. Bull's satisfied expression flickered with uncertainty, though he quickly recovered his composure. "Fortunate shot," Bull announced dismissively. Single hits prove nothing about sustained performance under pressure. The second target launched from 200 meters to Sarah's right, flying faster and requiring a longer lead calculation. Sarah worked the sticky bolt action quickly, chambering a fresh round while tracking the target's flight path. The rifle's damaged stock made smooth mounting difficult, but she'd learned to compensate for equipment deficiencies throughout her military career. Shot 2 connected cleanly, pulverizing the clay target at the peak of its trajectory. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as they began to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary, a demonstration of marksmanship that transcended any particular weapon or conditions. Bull's commentary became more defensive. "Basic moving target skills," he explained to the corporate observers. "Championship shooting requires consistent precision across multiple disciplines, not occasional lucky hits." Targets 3 and 4 launched simultaneously from different directions, testing Sarah's ability to prioritize threats and engage multiple objectives rapidly. The damaged rifle's bolt hung up momentarily as she cycled the action, but Sarah cleared the malfunction smoothly and engaged both targets within the time limit. Both clay pigeons exploded in perfect sequence, demonstrating not just marksmanship but tactical thinking under pressure. Several corporate observers exchanged meaningful glances, recognizing skills that went far beyond recreational shooting ability. "Multiple target engagement," one Olympic scout murmured to his colleague. "That's advanced tactical marksmanship. Where did she learn those techniques?" Amy Harrison smiled grimly as she continued recording. Sarah was doing exactly what they'd hoped, proving that excellence transcended any equipment limitations or artificial obstacles. Targets 5 through 8 challenged Sarah's range estimation and ballistic knowledge as they flew at distances from 75 to 350 meters. Each required different lead calculations and elevation adjustments, testing her understanding of external ballistics and environmental factors. Despite the scope's inconsistent tracking and the rifle's mechanical problems, Sarah connected with all 4 targets. Her movements were economical and precise, wasting no motion while demonstrating the kind of efficiency that marked professional-level shooters. Bull's confident demeanor was cracking visibly. His plan to humiliate Sarah was backfiring spectacularly, instead showcasing abilities that impressed even the most experienced observers. Worse, his obvious equipment sabotage was becoming apparent to everyone watching. Impressive adaptation to challenging conditions, Rangemaster Mitchell announced loudly, his comment carrying clear implications about the deliberate handicaps Sarah was overcoming. Targets 9 and 10 launched from extreme angles, requiring Sarah to shoot while moving and adjust her stance rapidly. The damaged rifle's balance made such shots exponentially more difficult. But Sarah had trained in similar scenarios during military deployments, where equipment failures were common and adaptation was essential for survival. Both targets shattered on impact, drawing appreciative applause from corporate observers who were beginning to understand they were witnessing something special. This wasn't just skilled shooting, it was a masterclass in overcoming adversity through superior fundamentals and mental toughness. 11 consecutive hits, one documentary filmmaker whispered to his camera operator. With obviously compromised equipment, this is incredible footage. Bull's face had turned red with frustrated anger. His carefully planned demonstration was becoming Sarah's triumph, exposing his prejudice while validating her extraordinary abilities. The corporate observers were clearly impressed, asking questions about Sarah's background and training that Bull couldn't answer without revealing his discriminatory treatment. Targets 11, 12, and 13 launched in rapid succession, testing Sarah's ability to maintain performance under maximum pressure. The damaged scope finally gave up completely, its internal elements rattling loose and making precise aiming impossible. Sarah was essentially shooting by instinct and muscle memory alone. All 3 targets exploded in sequence, each hit more impressive than the last. The corporate observers were openly amazed, several taking notes and making phone calls to colleagues who needed to hear about the performance they were witnessing. 14 consecutive hits, Amy announced loudly, ensuring everyone understood the magnitude of Sarah's achievement. With equipment that should have been retired years ago, the final clay pigeon would determine whether Sarah achieved perfect performance or fell just short of complete victory. Bull watched with desperate hope that she would finally miss, giving him some justification for his treatment and evaluation of her abilities. The last target launched from maximum range 400 meters, flying fast and low across the prairie backdrop. Sarah tracked it smoothly through the broken scope's distorted view, calculating lead and elevation while fighting the rifle's mechanical deficiencies. Her final shot broke cleanly, the bullet catching the clay target at the furthest edge of its flight path. Orange dust marked another perfect hit as the crowd erupted in applause that could be heard across the entire academy grounds. 15 out of 15, Rangemaster Mitchell announced officially. Perfect score under extremely challenging conditions. This represents some of the finest marksmanship I've witnessed in 30 years of competitive shooting. Bull Patterson stood frozen in shock, watching his carefully planned humiliation transform into Sarah's complete vindication. The corporate observers were surrounding Amy Harrison, asking about Sarah's availability for sponsorship and advanced training opportunities. Sarah set down the broken rifle and looked directly at Bull Patterson, her expression calm and professional. Despite the magnitude of her achievement, she just delivered the most devastating response to discrimination imaginable, perfect performance that no amount of prejudice could explain away or diminish. The war was over, and Sarah Chen had won it decisively. But the reckoning for Bull Patterson was just beginning. The corporate demonstration's aftermath unfolded like a carefully orchestrated collapse of Bull Patterson's entire discriminatory system. Within hours of Sarah's perfect performance, the academy was buzzing with conversations about equipment, sabotage, biased evaluations, and the extraordinary marksmanship they'd witnessed despite deliberate handicaps. Rachel Martinez from the National Rifle Association's Ethics Division arrived at Colorado State Shooting Academy the following morning, accompanied by 2 federal investigators and armed with warrants authorizing a comprehensive review of training records, equipment assignments, and instructor evaluations. Word had spread quickly through competitive shooting circles about the FAVA demonstration, and the NRA was responding to multiple complaints about discriminatory practices. Mr. Patterson, Martinez announced as she established her command center in the Academy's conference room, We're here investigating allegations of instructor misconduct, equipment sabotage, and systematic discrimination against students based on gender and military background. Bull's confident facade cracked immediately. The corporate observers had documented everything from the previous day, including close-up photographs of Sarah's damaged rifle and recorded commentary about the obvious equipment disparities. Worse, several representatives had already contacted the NRA, expressing concerns about the Academy's training standards and evaluation methods. "Inspector Martinez," Bull replied with forced composure, "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Perhaps some disgruntled student making wild accusations because they couldn't meet our championship standards." Martinez opened a thick folder containing months of evidence that Amy Harrison had compiled. The allegations come from multiple sources, including faculty members, corporate observers, and former students. We also have extensive documentation of deliberately compromised equipment and falsified evaluation records. Amy Harrison had spent the night organizing her evidence into an irrefutable case against Bull's systematic discrimination. Audio recordings captured his explicitly biased comments during faculty meetings. Photographs documented the equipment sabotage that preceded Sarah's exercises. Sworn statements from other instructors described a pattern of harassment that stretched back years. "We have recordings of you making discriminatory statements about female students and military veterans," Martinez continued, activating a digital recorder. Bull's voice filled the room, captured during a faculty meeting 3 weeks earlier. "Some of these diversity admissions think they can waltz into competitive shooting just because they've got political agendas backing them up. Real marksmanship is about natural talent, not social engineering experiments." The color drained from Bull's face as his own words condemned him. Martinez continued playing recordings, each one more damaging than the last. Bull discussing strategies to eliminate unsuitable candidates, complaining about lowered standards for women and minorities, and bragging about his ability to maintain program integrity regardless of outside pressure. "These recordings were made during official faculty meetings," Martinez explained. "Multiple witnesses can verify their authenticity and context." Bull's lawyer, a nervous man in expensive suit had arrived that morning, was frantically taking notes while realizing his client faced serious federal violations. The evidence was overwhelming and came from impeccable sources who had no apparent motivation beyond exposing genuine misconduct. Martinez produced additional documentation that destroyed any remaining credibility Bull might have claimed. "We've also examined the equipment assigned to Miss Chen for yesterday's demonstration. Our technical analysis confirms multiple mechanical defects that should have removed that rifle from service months ago." She displayed photographs of the damaged scope, worn bolt action, and compromised stock that Sarah had been forced to use. Independent ballistics experts had examined the weapon and confirmed that achieving any accuracy with such equipment was remarkable, making Sarah's perfect performance virtually impossible to explain through normal competitive shooting standards. "Mr. Patterson, you knowingly assigned defective equipment to a student during a high-profile demonstration, endangering both her safety and the Academy's reputation. This represents gross negligence and deliberate sabotage of educational standards." The most damaging evidence came from Range Master James Mitchell, whose detailed documentation of the demonstration provided objective proof of the extraordinary circumstances Sarah had overcome. His report included precise measurements of equipment deficiencies, environmental conditions, and performance metrics that painted a clear picture of deliberate handicapping. Miss Chen's achievement yesterday ranks among the finest marksmanship demonstrations I've witnessed in 30 years of competitive shooting, Mitchell testified. The fact that she accomplished this with obviously compromised equipment suggests abilities that exceed most professional-level competitors. Bull attempted a desperate defense, claiming that challenging conditions were standard practice for Identifying championship potential. Equipment failures happen in competitive shooting, he argued. Real champions adapt to any circumstances. Martinez responded by producing testimony from corporate observers who'd attended the demonstration. Representatives from Olympic training centers, major sporting goods companies, and documentary filmmakers all described the obvious equipment sabotage and biased commentary they'd witnessed. Mr. Patterson, one Olympic scout, had written in his official report, "Your treatment of Miss Chen was unprofessional and appeared deliberately designed to ensure her failure. The equipment she was assigned was clearly unsuitable for any serious shooting exercise." The investigation expanded to include former students who'd been driven out of the program through similar harassment campaigns. Martinez had located 6 individuals who'd experienced comparable treatment equipment sabotage, falsified evaluations, and systematic discrimination that had forced them to abandon their competitive shooting aspirations. "Sarah Chen wasn't your first target," Martinez stated grimly. "You've been using your position to eliminate students you considered unworthy for years. The pattern is clear and well documented." Amy Harrison provided the final piece of evidence that sealed Bull's fate: comprehensive ballistics data, proving that Sarah's performance exceeded not just academy standards, but national competitive benchmarks. Her precision, consistency, and adaptability under adverse conditions demonstrated abilities that qualified her for Olympic-level training programs. Miss Chen scored in the 99th percentile of competitive shooters nationwide, Amy testified. Yet, Mr. Patterson consistently evaluated her performance as barely adequate, falsifying official records to support his discriminatory agenda. Martinez concluded her presentation with documentation of the broader impact Bull's misconduct had created. The Academy's reputation was damaged, corporate sponsorship opportunities were threatened, and the entire competitive shooting community was questioning training standards that allowed such systematic discrimination. "Mr. Patterson," Martinez announced formally, "you are hereby suspended from all instructional duties, pending criminal investigation. Your certifications with the National Rifle Association are revoked effective immediately." Bull's face crumpled as the reality hit him. His competitive shooting career was over, and he faced potential federal charges for civil rights violations and fraud. The academy that had protected him for 15 years was cutting ties to preserve their own accreditation and reputation. "This is a witch hunt," Bull protested desperately. "Political correctness run amok. I've been protecting competitive shooting standards for 20 years. Martinez's response was ice-cold professional. "Mr. Patterson, you've been corrupting competitive shooting standards to serve your personal prejudices. Miss Chen's performance yesterday proved that excellence recognizes no gender, background, or economic status, qualities you apparently never understood." As federal agents escorted Bull from the academy grounds, Sarah watched from the training facility windows. The man who'd tried to destroy her dreams was being led away in handcuffs, his career and reputation destroyed by the same prejudice he'd wielded against countless students. But Sarah's thoughts were already turning toward the future. Corporate sponsors were calling with offers. Olympic training centers wanted to evaluate her potential, and the competitive shooting world was recognizing talents that Bull Patterson had tried desperately to suppress. Justice had been served. But Sarah Chen's real journey was just beginning. The broken rifle had become the instrument of her liberation, opening doors to opportunities she'd never imagined possible. 6 months after Bull Patterson's arrest and conviction for civil rights violations, Sarah Chen stood on the Olympic Training Center firing line in Colorado Springs, wearing the crisp uniform of the United States National Shooting Team. The precision rifle in her hands represented the pinnacle of competitive marksmanship technology, a custom-built instrument worth more than most people's cars and capable of sub-half-minute accuracy at distances exceeding 1,000 meters. The transformation had been swift and dramatic. Within days of the corporate demonstration, Sarah received calls from Olympic coaches, professional shooting teams, and military special operations units seeking to evaluate her extraordinary abilities. The performance that Bull Patterson had intended as her public humiliation had instead launched her toward the highest levels of competitive marksmanship. Captain Jessica Torres from the Army Marksmanship Unit had been the first to make contact, offering Sarah an immediate evaluation for the military's elite competitive shooting program. "We've been following your situation," Torres explained during their initial phone conversation. "What you accomplished with that broken rifle demonstrates exactly the kind of adaptability and mental toughness we need for international competition." The evaluation process had been intense but exhilarating. Sarah spent 2 weeks at Fort Benning, undergoing comprehensive testing that assessed not just her shooting abilities, but her psychological resilience, physical conditioning, and potential for development under elite coaching. The results exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. "Miss Chen," the head coach announced after reviewing her evaluation scores, "you possess natural abilities that typically take decades to develop through conventional training. We'd like to offer you immediate placement in our Olympic preparation program." Sarah's acceptance into the national team program triggered a cascade of opportunities throughout the competitive shooting world. Major sporting goods companies competed to sponsor her equipment and training expenses. Documentary filmmakers requested interviews about her journey from military maintenance worker to Olympic prospect. Shooting academies nationwide invited her to conduct seminars on overcoming adversity and achieving excellence under challenging conditions. But the opportunity that meant most to Sarah came from an unexpected source. Colorado State Shooting Academy, now under new management following Bull Patterson's removal, offered her a position as head instructor for their veteran outreach program. The academy wanted to rebuild its reputation by embracing the inclusive excellence that Sarah represented. "We need someone who understands both the technical aspects of competitive shooting and the challenges faced by underrepresented groups in our sport," Amy Harrison explained. Amy had been promoted to Academy Director following Bull's departure and was leading comprehensive reforms designed to prevent future discrimination. Sarah accepted the position with enthusiasm, seeing it as an opportunity to ensure that other aspiring competitors wouldn't face the obstacles she'd overcome. Her first initiative was establishing equipment standards that prevented instructors from sabotaging student performance through inferior weapons assignments. "Every student deserves access to functional, properly maintained equipment," Sarah announced during her first faculty meeting. "Personal bias will never again determine training opportunities at this academy." The changes extended far beyond equipment policies. Sarah implemented objective evaluation standards based on measurable performance metrics rather than subjective instructor opinions. Student progress was tracked through electronic scoring systems that eliminated the possibility of falsified evaluations. Independent observers regularly monitored training sessions to ensure fair treatment for all participants. The transformation was remarkable. Within 3 months, the Academy's enrollment had doubled as word spread about the new inclusive training environment. Female participation increased by 300%, and military veterans began seeking out the program specifically because of Sarah's involvement and leadership. "You've created something special here," one new student told Sarah after completing her first month of training. "For the first time, I feel like my performance is being evaluated fairly, based on actual skill rather than preconceptions about who belongs in competitive shooting." Sarah's Olympic training continued alongside her instructor responsibilities, creating a demanding schedule that required military-level discipline and time management. Early mornings were dedicated to personal training sessions, afternoons to coaching academy students, and evenings to studying ballistics, sports psychology, and advanced competitive techniques. The dual role created unique opportunities for both Sarah and her students. Academy participants could observe Olympic-level training methods firsthand, while Sarah gained valuable teaching experience that deepened her understanding of marksmanship fundamentals. The symbiotic relationship benefited everyone involved. Patterson's conviction had triggered investigations at shooting academies nationwide, exposing a network of discriminatory practices that had kept qualified competitors grounded for years. Sarah found herself at the center of a broader reform movement, consulting with the NRA and Olympic committees on policies designed to promote inclusive excellence in competitive shooting. The Bull Patterson case became a watershed moment for our sport. Rachel Martinez explained during a national conference on competitive shooting standards. Sarah Chen's courage in confronting discrimination has protected countless future athletes from similar treatment. The most satisfying development came when Sarah received a letter from a young veteran named Maria Santos, who had just been accepted into the Academy's training program. "Dear Coach Chen," the letter began, "I wanted to thank you for making it possible for people like me to pursue our dreams. Your example showed me that excellence and determination matter more than what other people think we're capable of." Sarah carefully filed the letter with dozens of others she'd received from aspiring competitors around the country. Bull Patterson had tried to ground her dreams, but instead he'd given her wings that lifted others toward their own aspirations. The warehouse job at Fort Carson felt like a lifetime ago. Sarah had discovered her place not just in competitive shooting, but in the broader mission of making the sport accessible to everyone willing to pursue excellence. She'd learned that true victory wasn't about proving you belonged. It was about creating space for others to belong alongside you. Her phone buzzed with a message from the Olympic team coordinator. "Sarah, your qualifying scores have been exceptional. We're recommending you for the World Championship team. Training camp begins next month." As Sarah read the message, she touched the small pin on her Academy instructor polo, a gift from Amy Harrison, featuring crossed rifles and the words, "Excellence through opportunity." Some battles were worth fighting, not just for yourself, but for everyone who would come after. Bull Patterson had sent her one final bitter note from whatever dead-end job he'd found after prison, but Sarah had been too busy coaching future champions and preparing for international competition to read his resentments. She had more important things to focus on, like proving that broken rifles couldn't break unbreakable spirits. The mission was no longer about survival. It was about soaring. 2 years after the corporate demonstration that changed everything, Sarah Chen stood atop the podium at the World Shooting Championships in Munich, Germany, a gold medal hanging around her neck and the American flag rising behind her as the national anthem played. The precision rifle that had carried her to victory was a far cry from the broken weapon Bull Patterson had assigned her that fateful day. But the fundamentals that secured her championship were exactly the same. The journey from military maintenance worker to world champion had been swift but earned through countless hours of training, competition, and dedication to excellence that transcended any particular equipment or conditions. Sarah's victory wasn't just personal. It represented validation for every athlete who'd been told they didn't belong in their chosen sport. The championship medal was remarkable, but the impact Sarah had created extended far beyond personal achievement. Her story had become a catalyst for systematic changes throughout competitive shooting that protected future generations from the discrimination she'd overcome. The Sarah Chen protocols, as they'd become known in shooting circles, established objective standards for equipment assignments, evaluation criteria, and instructor conduct that prevented bias from corrupting training programs. Colorado State Shooting Academy had become a model for inclusive excellence under Sarah's leadership. The veteran outreach program she'd developed had graduated over 200 students in 2 years, with a success rate that exceeded traditional competitive shooting programs by significant margins. Female participation in the sport had increased by 400% nationwide, inspired by Sarah's example and the reforms her courage had triggered. What you accomplished wasn't just about winning competitions. Amy Harrison reflected during Sarah's championship celebration party at the Academy. "You fundamentally changed how our sport defines and develops talent. That's a legacy that will outlast any individual medal or record." The celebration was attended by students from across the country who'd benefited from the opportunities Sarah had created. Maria Santos, the young veteran whose letter had touched Sarah so deeply, was now competing at national levels and coaching other military women who wanted to pursue competitive shooting. Jake Morrison, ironically, had become one of Sarah's most dedicated students after witnessing how inclusive training methods had improved his own performance. "I was wrong about everything," Jake admitted during his speech at the celebration. "I thought competitive shooting was about exclusivity and natural talent. Sarah proved it's actually about work ethic, fundamental skills, and creating opportunities for everyone to excel." Even Tommy Kowalski had reached out after Sarah's championship victory, acknowledging how his privileged background had blinded him to the barriers other athletes faced. His family's sporting goods company now sponsored Sarah's equipment and funded scholarships for underrepresented competitors seeking advanced training. Bull Patterson's name was mentioned only once during the celebration, when Range Master James Mitchell read a statement he'd prepared for the occasion. "Discrimination corrupts everything it touches," Mitchell declared. Sarah's triumph proves that excellence flourishes when prejudice is eliminated and opportunity is extended to everyone willing to pursue it. The most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The United States Army had commissioned Sarah as a warrant officer and assigned her to the Army Marksmanship Unit, where she would train future military competitors while continuing her own Olympic preparation. The position represented the military's acknowledgement that her abilities transcended any conventional career path. Warrant Officer Chen, Colonel Rebecca Hartman, announced during the commissioning ceremony, "Your journey from enlisted maintenance to world championship demonstrates the kind of excellence the Army should nurture in every soldier. Your new role will ensure that military marksmanship benefits from both your competitive success and your understanding of overcoming institutional barriers." Sarah's Olympic preparations were proceeding ahead of schedule, with coaches predicting she would be a strong medal contender in multiple disciplines. But her focus remained divided between personal achievement and the broader mission of expanding opportunities throughout competitive shooting. The most rewarding aspect of her success was the constant stream of letters from young athletes who'd been inspired by her story. A teenage girl from rural Montana wrote about overcoming her high school coach's skepticism to earn a shooting scholarship. A former Marine with PTSD described how Sarah's example had motivated him to pursue competitive shooting as therapy and personal growth. An immigrant family thanked Sarah for proving that American dreams remain accessible to those willing to work for them. Each letter reminded Sarah that her victory over Bull Patterson's prejudice had created ripple effects throughout the competitive shooting community and beyond. Young athletes from all backgrounds now saw competitive marksmanship as an achievable goal rather than an exclusive club reserved for the privileged few. The transformation was visible at shooting ranges across the country, where diversity had replaced homogeneity and objective performance had superseded subjective favoritism. Training programs that had once excluded capable athletes were now actively recruiting from underrepresented communities, understanding that talent existed everywhere and needed only opportunity to flourish. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message that would have seemed impossible just 3 years earlier. "Coach Chen, this is David Burton, the Olympic team director. We've reviewed your recent performance data and would like to discuss your potential for team captaincy at the upcoming Olympics. Your leadership abilities are as impressive as your marksmanship skills." As Sarah read the message, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a maintenance hangar at Fort Carson to the pinnacle of international competition. Bull Patterson had intended to break her spirit with a broken rifle, but instead he'd forged her determination into something Unbreakable. The broken rifle still sat in Sarah's office at the academy, mounted on a plaque with the inscription, "Excellence transcends equipment." Students often asked about its significance, providing Sarah with opportunities to share the story of how obstacle became opportunity and prejudice became purpose. That evening, as Sarah cleaned her championship rifle and prepared for the next day's training, she thought about her Uncle Roberto's words from years ago. Flying isn't about showing off, Mia. It's about being where people need you when they need you most. She'd found her own version of flight in competitive shooting, but the principle remained the same. Sarah Chen had learned to soar not just for herself, but to keep the sky open for everyone who would follow. The broken rifle had become a bridge to broken barriers, and the mission would continue as long as there were dreams worth defending and athletes worth believing in. Excellence, she'd discovered, wasn't about proving you belonged. It was about making sure others could belong alongside you. And that was a legacy worth more than any medal she could ever win. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.